Have you ever gotten some pretty strange advice? Advice that just completely shocked you. It just made you wonder, what the heck is this person talking about? Well, that's the advice I got one day. I was talking with my friend, a speaker, like me, Ted. Ted was a speaker, and I was explaining to Ted I was having a hard time coming up with topics. I said, Ted, I don't know what to do. I'm just not sure what to talk about. I mean, I've got all these different things maybe in my head, but I'm not sure what would be a good subject. What is the audience going to be interested in? And Ted said, Tim, that's a good question. A lot of speakers have that challenge of figuring out what to talk about. There's something I advise every speaker when they get into those situations. There's something simple to do. I said, great, Ted, what is it? And Ted said, F your speech. And I said, what? And Ted explained. The challenge many speakers have when they're trying to figure out a topic is to get caught up in all these topics, and they know on some level or another it's not going to connect with the audience. It's just not going to work. They know it's not going to work, so they're afraid to do it. And the secret understanding of what to do with your speech is found in the F's. More precisely, the 4 F's. There are 4 F's. Really can help you develop good content for your audience. And if you F your speech right from the very beginning, you're going to connect stronger, deeper, better than you ever have before, because there'll be something special that happens. When you use the 4 F's, you discover that things get a little bit personal. Now, if you don't use the 4 F's, then you're stuck. You get up there, you know you're not connecting with the audience, you're nervous, you're worried about stuff, and as you go on, you can see the audience kind of separating from you because they're not buying into this. They're looking at you like, who are you to be talking to us? And you know they're thinking, why are you up there? What makes you so special? You ever given a speech and felt the audience is thinking that? Why are you up there? Why are you so special? Why are you talking to us? Remember that happen? That's what happens when you don't use the 4 F's. When you use the 4 F's, suddenly there's a connection there. A personal connection is made. The great thing about the 4 F's is they're simple, they're easy to use, and they're very powerful. So today you will learn the 4 F's. You'll find out the importance to F your audience. You'll discover how to make that connection, strong, deep connection with your audience, stronger than perhaps you never thought possible. And you'll learn all of this in the next 20 minutes or so. Start out with each of the 4 F's, explaining each of the 4 F's and how they work. Start with the first F, the second F, the third F. By the time you get to the 4th F, you'll understand the power of these F's. How they're so important, and how in your speaking you really want to make sure you F your audience. And it all begins with the first F. And the first part is the first F. The first F is something that is a small matter. Later on, when we talk about some of the other F's, we'll get into the bigger issues. But it's the beginning of things. It's that little thing that happens. If you can't talk about the little things, then you can't begin to make that important connection with your audience. It just doesn't work. The audience gets attention. If you're not even willing to share that, the audience thinks, forget it. And I was just thinking, they can't even share that thing. Well, how can I even listen to this person? Once you do share this little F, small F issue, but an important thing, At least it gives the audience a chance to get to know you, to get really personal. Get personal. It's important to be able to understand this F, how it works, and being able to share it. That means knowing it. So once you know it, once you understand this F, then you begin to get personal with the audience, then you begin to interconnect, and things start to happen. This F can really make that connection start to happen. Now, as mentioned, get to the other Fs, we have a deeper connection right here with this first F. It's a good start. And the first F is about your flaws. Your flaws. Basically, the first F is talking about the audience and explaining what's wrong with you. It's about coming out to your audience and kind of explaining what's wrong with you. What is wrong with you? What's something that's a flaw of yours? Opening up about that to the audience then encourages the audience to open up to you. Somebody has to go first in opening up things and making things personal. And believe me, it's not going to be your audience. They're not going to open up to you first. You have to open up first to them. And flaws, great way to do that. What's wrong with you? What things do you have wrong? Maybe one of your flaws is that you get angry easily. Things really set you off. So all of a sudden, boom, your anger comes out, you overreact, things get bad, and quickly you go into that second F we'll talk about in a little bit. But it begins with this flaw of yours. This thing that you just do wrong. Maybe a flaw could be that you don't think things through. You just kind of rush ahead. An old expression, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Well, maybe you're one of those persons rushing in. You don't think things out. You don't quite go through everything. So in situations, someone says, hey, we need a volunteer for this dangerous new project. Could cost you your job. And you think, that's me. And you say, yes, I'll do it. Maybe that's a flaw. You're rushing right in and getting things done. Whatever it is, that can begin to open you up and connecting with your audience. That first step of the flaw. Because once people understand that you're flawed, and you know that you're flawed, then your audience can think, okay, well, if that guy can open up about being flawed, maybe I can open up about being flawed too. And then you get that interconnection going, where the connection starts to happen between you and the audience, because the audience says, well, they're being honest with me, I'm going to be honest with them. And then the magic starts to happen. The first F opens things up. The first F of sharing your flaws happens. And also when you share your flaws and that first F gets going, something else happens too. Flaws lead to the second F. Once these flaws are established, you can start to get at some of the reasons for that second F. Have to have the flaws mentioned first. Then you start going on to that very important second F. Once you've gone into the first F, the flaws, you start to get at the second F. If you don't get to the second F, the flaws just aren't enough by themselves. It really is not going to make that deep connection. Get to the second F, if you don't get there, problems. You don't make the connection. It doesn't really happen. First F is the beginning, it's not the end of the journey. Got to get a second F. If you don't do that, the connection is lost and you feel that, well, I sort of shared something, but it just didn't really seem to be enough. Enough sharing just didn't happen. That all important, very important second F. We get to the third F, that's even more important. But this second F leads to that third F. Once you start to put the second F in, you'll notice, hey, getting a little bit more audience connection. A little bit more personal here. Starting to share a little bit more. Flaws are great, but now I'm really starting to share something. Really starting to share what those issues are. and the way that they work in my life. Once you start to share, your audience starts to share. So you get to that second F, your audience starts to share, that connection starts to be made, you're getting somewhere. You're really getting somewhere, making that connection to the audience, because you're getting to that all-important second F, which really helps that connection happen. And the second F is your frustrations. Frustrations. And the way it works is kind of your flaws lead to your frustrations. You get frustrated about the flaws you have. Because you try to work in these things and you just difficulty working with them. And that adds to that personal connection. So if you have a flaw that you keep volunteering for things you shouldn't volunteer for, a frustration is that you keep doing that. Because of that flaw of volunteering for things, you find yourself getting involved with all these things that frustrate you, that annoy you, that cause all these problems. Talk about that with your audience. Because just as your audience has flaws, your audience certainly has frustrations. When you open up about your frustrations, take another step towards getting the audience to open up about their frustrations. The whole thing is about getting everything on a level playing field. So the audience feels, okay, you get me. The audience thinks, okay, I think you got something there. I think there's a connection here. And opening up on your frustrations takes that next step of making that deeper personal connection. Because frustrations are so important. And so often, people try to ignore their frustrations, push them away, or pretend they don't have them. You've seen these people. Oh, my life is perfect. Everything is perfect. It's no problem at all. Everything's great. Well, fine. But if your life is perfect and you're fantastic, you're just a special person. And that doesn't help the audience connect. The audience thinks you're special and they aren't going to connect with you. So talk about, get involved with frustrations. And if you don't know what your frustrations are, take another look at those flaws you identified. What are your flaws? Those will tell you the things you're frustrated about. When you have a frustration, write it down. Well, this frustrates me. Okay, now I know what that frustration is. You can start talking about the frustration. Remember, frustration is where you want something and you can't get it. Something frustrates you. You're trying to push your way through and something stands in your way. That's the frustration, the resistance of whatever that is. And it could be something internal, a limitation you put on yourself. It could be a flaw. I said those flaws are the frustrations. Because you got this flaw, you can't get any further because you keep making the same mistake over and over again. That leads to frustration. Frustrations are very important because they lead to the third F. And the third F is a biggie. The third F is where it all comes together. Once you have your flaws, your frustrations, everything starts to come together and you're thinking you can't get through, then something happens. That's really important. And once your audience gets a sense of that, then they really make that personal connection with that third F. And so now it's the third F. And if you can't get at the third F and what the third F is, then the flaws that led to the frustrations really don't go anywhere. Audience opens a little bit, okay, you're frustrated, I get it, but it's not enough to make that deep connection. Not enough to really make that connection happen and the audience thinking, okay, really open up to me. Because flaws and frustrations are great, but if that's all you do, not going to make the connection. There has to be something else. It has to have that third F in there. The third F is so important to get the flaws and frustrations to mean something. The third F is there. If you don't have it, you don't have it. And you'll know it because you'll get a sense of just this didn't happen. There's no connection here. If you do have the third F, you make that connection. You make a strong connection with the audience. Because all of a sudden you're really opening up. You're really vulnerable once you get to that third F. You're really vulnerable, you're really sensitive, and the audience senses that sensitivity. They know that you're laying it on the line here. You're not hiding behind anything. It's like, oh boy, this is big. Because you're being honest. The third F is all about being honest. And if you don't think you have any third F, don't kid yourself. It's there. Find it, lay it out in front of the audience, be honest, make that deep connection. And that's when your flaws and your frustrations will come together with that third F. And the third F is your failures. Failures. When have you failed? What if you really, really wanted to do something and all of a sudden you knew, I'm not going to be able to do that? When did you ever get that sense, I blew it. I just blew it. I messed up big time. I failed. Talk to your audience about that time you failed, when you really blew it, when it just really didn't go well. That's honesty. And that's what your flaws and frustrations lead up to. You got the flaws, you get this problem, and you get frustrated, things don't go right. Finally leads up to this big failure. Tell the audience about that failure. Whatever it is. Maybe at a time you got so frustrated you couldn't get a raise, you went and you started shouting at your boss. Lost your job. Maybe that was a failure. Now, when you talk about failure, at some time you've got to go past that failure. Okay, today I'm not a failure, but back then I was a failure. This is about how to get that audience connection. Doesn't mean your whole speech is about how to fail or how to be a failure. Most likely, you aren't going to get a large audience for a speech called How to Be a Failure. You will get a large audience for a speech where I was a failure, I'm not today, here's how I did it. But in order to make that believable, I was a failure, you have to have a story about a time you actually failed. Maybe you think you never failed, everything you did was perfect. Well, no point talking to anybody because they've got nothing to learn from you. You were born a silver spoon in your mouth, everything is perfect, everything is fine. Well, you can't learn anything from that because the majority of people, it's not fine. They fail. They're looking for somebody else who failed and learned from that failure. That's not you. Forget about talking. Forget about motivating. So that failure is so important to share that failure, whatever it is. And then, out of your flaws, out of your frustrations, out of your failures, all this stuff really comes together in the fourth F. The fourth F is the source of your flaws, frustrations, and failures. Failures are so important. If you're looking for a place to find those failures, figure out where those failures are, look no further than the fourth F. The fourth F is where those failures all kind of live. That fourth F is so very important. And finally, to put it all together, is the fourth F. Fourth F, something if you don't have it, if you don't use it, then you really are ignoring a very important source of flaws, frustrations, and failures. If you don't use it at all and don't pay attention to it, it doesn't work. Because it's such a natural source of flaws, frustrations, and failures, people will notice that, hey, something's missing. Something's not here. You're not giving me the full thing. So ignoring the fourth F, not paying attention to it, not thinking about it, not using it, creates issues because people sense it's not there. Once you do have the fourth F, you get a sense of, okay, now we're at something. It connects very easily to the audience. Fourth F is something people instantly recognize. and are more likely to forgive your flaws, frustrations, and failures. You have the fourth F. Fourth F is so important to make that important connection. Make that connection with your audience. Because the flaws, frustrations, and failures all come together for that fourth F. It's that powerful and that useful. Once you start using the fourth F, all of a sudden your audience thinks, okay, I get it. I understand, this makes sense. And tell me more. I want to hear more about this. How this works. What happened. We're connecting. I know where you come from. I've been there myself. And the fourth F is about your firsts. Your firsts. What's the first thing you did? What happened the first time you did something? Think of the first time you did something. First off, first thing. First time. Something that connects with many people, so much it can be a cliche. It's used so often, but it's useful to think about as an example of a first. It's the first time you ride a bicycle. First time. Think about the flaws, the frustrations, the failures of riding a bicycle. The flaws of the nervousness, the scares, the problems with it. The frustrations, you kept falling down, you couldn't get back up again, you tried to keep going, you skinned your knees. The failures, you just kept going on and on like that. Got frustrated because you just couldn't get that bike working. Till one day, it did. And you went right on by, and you rode your bike. First time you did it, though, you had the flaws, frustration, failures all kind of come together. That's the magic of firsts. First time you do something, you're going to fail at it. Most likely going to fail. Most people fail the first time they try to do something. Whatever it is. And the bigger the failure, the better the story. First time you try to create your own company. Great failure story there. Of course, again, it's useful if you now have multi-million-dollar companies, and then you talk about the first time you failed. But that failure story connects with people. They get it. Okay, you failed. I get it. How did you get to where you are now? That's what people want to know. But in order, before you get to where you are now, the beginning, it's that failure. It's that first time you did something. The flaws, the frustrations, the failures, how they all come together with the first. First are very powerful. First, get that deep connection going with your audience. Talking about the first time you did something opens you wide up to your audience. When you share your first, your audience opens wide up to you. And then once you start connecting that flaws, frustrations, failures coming all together in your first, you make that deep connection with your audience. And then you can go on to some really great speeches. It's all about your first. All right, let's wrap up all the things you learned today about the 4 F's and how to F your audience. If you're thinking of a speech topic, think about that first time that you failed. First failure you had. Things that went really, really bad. Talk about that. Bring it out. It helps you connect deeply with the audience. It's personal. It makes you vulnerable. Later on, you'll talk about how you succeeded later because you learned some stuff, etc. But right now, talk about that failure. How it made you feel. Bring the feeling out of the rest of your audience. And getting even better, talk about flaws. Talk about the flaws that led you to the failure. The flaws, the things you just did wrong, just couldn't seem to get right. Just everything just kind of fell apart at that point because there was a flaw. It was a basic problem. There was just something wrong with you. share your audience what that is, what that flaw is. Your audience's flaws, the fact you know you have flaws and you can talk about it, that's a deep connection. That's personal. Personal things shared with an audience connect very deeply. Talk about your flaws. And talk about the place the flaws come from. Talk about the frustrations. The frustrations you have where things just don't go quite right. Or for some reason or another, you're not getting there. You're feeling that you're just pushing up against this wall and you're not getting anywhere. Your audience has frustrations. Share your frustrations. Something you have in common. Something that connects you deeply with your audience. What are the frustrations of the situation? Why is the big problem happening? Where do those frustrations come from? Talk about the frustrations lead to the flaws. The flaws eventually led to the failure. How that failure worked. And that'll put you ahead of many speakers out there. To get ahead of most of the speakers, to have a better time than most speakers out there, one more thing, the fourth F, focus on the firsts. What are the firsts? The first time you did something. Because the first time you did something, most likely you landed right on your face. Most likely just a smack down. Fall on your face, as world champion Darren LaCroix refers to it. Great description, great way to describe it. That first time, how frustrated you were, how it brought out all your flaws, how those flaws led to failure. First time you did something. Now, you might be thinking, Tim, there's no way I'm going to go up on stage and talk about my failures or talk about some sort of flaw that I have, or certainly talk about frustrations. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm not going to talk about the first time. I'm going to talk about when I'm good at things. It's all right. You can do that. Keep talking about those things. As long as you're okay with your audience disconnecting from you, not paying attention, not getting interested, keep doing what you're doing. If you want your audience to connect deeply with you, remember the 4 F's. The failures, the flaws, the frustrations, and most importantly, the firsts. Use the 4 F's in your next speech. F your audience.